It was supposed to be just another morning. Another busy day filled with board meetings, signatures, and silent rooms where everyone waited for his approval. Alexander Reed, the name that made investors straighten their backs and journalists lower their voices, stepped out of his black car onto the pavement of downtown Manhattan. The air was sharp, the kind that reminded you winter hadn't quite left yet. He adjusted his cufflinks the same way he'd done for years and told himself, focus. He had a merger to finalize, numbers to hit, and a reputation to keep flawless. But as he crossed the street toward his office tower, something, or rather, someone, caught his eye. 4 little girls were sitting on the curb across from the building. Their hair was tangled, their clothes mismatched and worn. They were trying to share one small sandwich between them, a simple, ordinary scene in a city full of people rushing past others' pain. He would have ignored it, he should have ignored it. But then, one of the girls looked up, and Alexander froze. He stopped mid-step, the city noise dimming in his ears. Her face, her eyes, they were identical to someone he hadn't seen in 10 years. Someone he'd spent a decade trying to forget, but never could. Lydia, his wife, or his ex-wife, the woman he drove away with words colder than the marble floors of his penthouse. The girl's eyes were Lydia's. The shape, the color, even the way they blinked when confused, it was like seeing a ghost that breathed. He turned, looking again, just to be sure he wasn't losing his mind. But as the other 3 girls lifted their heads, something inside him twisted painfully. They all looked like her. No, not just her. Each one carried traces of him too. The chin, the nose, the faint dimple that only appeared when they smiled. He felt the air leave his lungs. His driver called out, "Sir, are you all right?" Alexander didn't answer. He was staring at the girls like he'd seen the past come alive. He had spent 10 years building an empire, expanding Reed Holdings into a global name. He had the house, the cars, the influence. But suddenly, standing there, he felt like everything he'd achieved meant nothing. He stepped closer. The oldest of the 4 girls, maybe 10 or 11, noticed him and nudged the others. They huddled closer together, protective. The smallest one clutched a worn-out teddy bear missing an ear. Alexander's instinct was to say something, but what words could bridge 10 lost years? A security guard approached, frowning. "Mr. Reed, do you want me to move them along?" He blinked, pulled out of his daze. "No. Leave them." His voice came out harsher than intended. The guard stepped back immediately. The girls looked frightened. Alexander quickly softened his tone. "It's all right," he said quietly, almost to himself. The light turned green. People crossed the street around him, muttering. He stood still, unable to move. The eldest girl whispered something to the younger ones, and they started gathering their few things, a plastic bag, a broken umbrella, the half-eaten sandwich wrapped in a napkin. They looked like they were used to leaving quickly, used to not being wanted anywhere for too long. As they walked away, something inside Alexander snapped. He followed them. It wasn't planned. It wasn't logical. But every step he took felt like gravity was pulling him. He kept a distance, just enough not to frighten them. They turned corners, crossed streets, disappeared into a narrow alleyway between 2 buildings. When he reached the corner, he saw where they went, a makeshift shelter near the back of an abandoned café. Torn blankets, cardboard boxes, a plastic crate that served as a table. The eldest girl was helping the youngest wash her hands with bottled water. The other 2 were laughing quietly over a cracked phone screen. Alexander's throat tightened. He had spent millions on charity foundations, given speeches about social responsibility, yet here were 4 little girls living like this, and for reasons he couldn't explain, it felt personal. He turned around and leaned against the wall, trying to steady his breathing. Could it be? No. Lydia had disappeared after their divorce. She'd refused alimony, refused any contact. The last he heard, she'd moved out of the city. There were rumors, but he'd told himself it didn't matter. He buried himself in work, convincing himself she was gone for good. But now, 4 girls who looked exactly like her? It couldn't be coincidence. He pulled out his phone, hesitated, then called his assistant. "Evelyn, I need you to find someone." "Of course, sir." "A business contact?" "No," he said slowly. "A woman, Lydia Reed." There was a pause on the other end. "I thought you said not to bring her up again." "I'm bringing her up now," he said, his voice low. "Find her, immediately." When he ended the call, he looked back toward the alley. The girls were gone. He felt panic rise, a rare, unfamiliar feeling for a man who controlled everything. He hurried down the alley, scanning left and right, but they had vanished into the city's endless maze. All that remained was a small piece of paper that had fallen near the crate. He picked it up carefully. It was part of a drawing. A child's drawing 4 stick figures holding hands under a crooked sundae. In the corner, written in messy handwriting, Mummy, Emma, Lila, Nora, and Rose. 4 names. He ran his thumb over the names, his mind spinning. Emma, Lila, Nora, Rose. He whispered them out loud, as if testing how they sounded. They felt familiar, almost right. The wind carried a faint sound of laughter, maybe theirs, maybe not, and for a long moment, Alexander just stood there, holding the crumpled drawing like it was the most fragile thing in the world. He didn't know what was happening yet, but something inside him, something he thought was long dead, had just woken up. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, staring at the skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The reflection that stared back wasn't the confident CEO anymore. It was a man haunted by faces he couldn't forget. He poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. His phone buzzed. "Evelyn, sir, I found something. There's a record, Lydia Harper. She changed her name. Address is..." He froze. Harper. Her maiden name. He stood up, the glass still untouched, and looked out at the city again. 10 years ago, he thought success meant never looking back. Tonight, he realized some mistakes don't fade with time. They wait until you're ready to face them. And sometimes, they stare right back at you, through the eyes of 4 little girls on a cold city street. The next morning came quietly, but Alexander Reed didn't feel rested. He hadn't slept more than an hour. His penthouse, normally a symbol of control and order, now felt like a cage filled with memories that refused to stay buried. He sat at the edge of his bed, holding the same crumpled drawing he'd found in the alley. Mummy, Emma, Lila, Nora, and Rose. He'd read those names 100 times through the night. The more he stared, the more certain he became that those girls were connected to Lydia. The problem was Lydia had sworn never to see him again. He remembered the last fight vividly, as if it had happened yesterday. The day she walked out, the city had been drenched in rain. She was standing by the doorway, her suitcase half-zipped, trembling but determined. "You don't even see me anymore," she had said. Her voice had been small, but steady. "You see a project, a problem to fix, a reputation to protect, but not a wife." He'd stood there, hands in his pockets, acting calm, because that's what he did, control the moment, even when it was breaking apart. "Lydia, this isn't the time for drama. I have meetings in an hour." She laughed, that short, bitter laugh that had haunted him ever since. "There's never a time for me, Alex. You schedule your life like I'm a distraction you can delete from your calendar." He hadn't answered. He'd watched her grab her suitcase, her wedding ring glinting one last time under the hallway light. When the door closed, he'd told himself it was for the best. He was becoming someone important, a CEO, a man of results. Now, sitting there 10 years later, he wasn't sure if he'd built an empire or a monument to regret. He opened his laptop, the city skyline reflected on the dark screen. Evelyn's message was still there, an address, a few recent records under Lydia Harper. A small coffee shop in Brooklyn was listed as her place of employment. He typed the address into his car's GPS, but before leaving, he hesitated. What would he even say? "Hi, I ruined our life, and by the way, do we have 4 daughters?" Still, he couldn't shake the image of those girls, their smiles, their eyes, the way they shared that sandwich. So he left. The coffee shop sat at the corner of a quiet street in Brooklyn, the kind of place where people wrote novels on laptops or read poetry over cappuccinos. A chalkboard outside said, "Try our cinnamon latte, sweet enough to forgive someone." He almost smiled at the irony. Inside, it smelled of roasted beans and sugar. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered, and there she was, behind the counter, wearing a simple grey apron and tying her hair into a loose bun. Lydia. He froze. 10 years had passed, but time had been kind to her. She looked older, yes, but not worn. There was a grace to her now, a calmness he didn't remember from the nights they used to argue. She didn't notice him at first. She was laughing with a customer, wiping the counter, moving with the quiet rhythm of someone who'd found peace in small things. When she turned toward him, her laughter faded. For a moment, neither of them said a word. The air between them thickened, filled with all the words they'd never said. "Alex," she finally breathed. Not angry, not cold, just surprised. "Lydia," he said softly. "You look well." Her lips pressed together. "You shouldn't be here." "I know." He hesitated. "But I needed to see you," said the smanted repeat of the correcting fallen. "For the possibles reader to," said coming to do and. She crossed her arms, the same defensive gesture she used to make when she felt cornered. "After 10 years? What changed?" He looked down, unsure how to begin. "Yesterday, I saw 4 girls in the city. She froze, every muscle in her face tightening. "Don't. They looked like you," he continued quietly. "Like us." Lydia's eyes flickered with something fear, maybe, or guilt. "You should go." "Lydia," his voice softened. They're none of your concern." He took a step forward. "I think they are." Her tone sharpened. "Don't you dare. You walked away first. You chose your empire over me. You don't get to come back because you suddenly feel sentimental." He swallowed hard. "I didn't walk away. You did." She laughed bitterly. "Oh, right. Because I physically left the house, that makes me the one who abandoned us." There it was, the old tension rising again, the same loop they'd never escaped. But before he could speak, a small bell rang from the back door. 4 little voices shouted, "Mom!" Alexander turned and time stopped. The 4 girls from yesterday came running in, dropping their school bags by the door. One of them tripped, and the smallest girl helped her up, giggling. They looked at him, confused. Lydia stepped in front of them protectively. "Go wash your hands, girls. Mommy's working." "But Mom." "Now," she said firmly. The girls exchanged glances, whispering to each other before heading to the back sink. Alexander's chest felt like it was caving in. He whispered, "They're mine, aren't they?" Lydia didn't answer. She just stared at him, the kind of stare that said more than words ever could. He nodded slowly, tears he didn't expect burning in his eyes. 10 years, Lydia. 10 years I thought you were gone." "I was," she said quietly, "and you were too." He wanted to argue, to explain, to fix it, but there was no version of the truth that didn't make him the villain. "I want to help," he said finally. "Please." Lydia looked down at the counter, her fingers trembling. "Help? With what? The years you missed? The birthdays? The nights I worked 2 shifts so they could eat?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. The sound of laughter came from the back, the girls, drying their hands, humming to each other. Lydia looked at him one last time and whispered, "They don't know who you are. Don't take that away from them." Then she turned and walked into the kitchen. Alexander stood there for a long time, surrounded by the smell of coffee and the ghosts of every choice he'd made. When he finally left, the bell over the door chimed again, soft, final, like the closing of a chapter he never wanted to end. But he knew something now. He had 4 daughters, and he wasn't going to lose them too. Alexander Reed didn't go to the office the next day. For the first time in years, his assistant Evelyn received an email that simply read, "Cancel all my meetings." Indefinitely, people whispered, shareholders called, the media speculated, but Alexander didn't care. He was a man who'd spent a decade building an empire made of numbers. Yet suddenly, he couldn't stop thinking about 4 little girls in a coffee shop, girls who carried his eyes, his laugh, his blood. He sat in his car outside that same café again, watching from across the street. He'd been there for hours. Lydia opened the shop early, helped customers, smiled politely, and closed late. The girls came after school, sometimes helping behind the counter, sometimes doing homework at a corner table. He watched as they took turns sweeping the floor, giggling over spilled sugar. He noticed how Lydia always tied a red ribbon around the youngest one's hair, Rose, if he remembered the names right. Small details, ordinary things, but they hit him harder than any quarterly loss ever could. For 10 years, he'd told himself Lydia was fine without him, that she was stubborn, proud, too emotional to survive his world. But seeing her now, running this tiny café, raising 4 children alone, he realized she hadn't needed his money. She needed him to be a better man, and he hadn't been. Later that week, Alexander visited a quiet park near the café. He sat on a bench, watching the girls play tag in the distance. Lydia was there too, talking to another mother on a nearby bench. He didn't dare approach, not yet. He noticed how the oldest one, Emma, kept looking out for her sisters. She was responsible, like Lydia used to be, Lila, the second, had a fiery spirit, always running ahead, challenging the others to keep up. Nora was shy, more observant, clutching a small notebook. And Rose, she was pure sunshine, with a laugh that made even the pigeons pause. It hurt to realize how much he'd missed. Evelyn's voice came through his earpiece. He had her on a discreet call. "Sir, are you sure about this? You've been following them for days. If Lydia finds out—" "She already hates me," Alexander said quietly. "I'm not trying to stalk her. I just need to understand what they've lived through." Evelyn hesitated. "You could help them financially. I tried that once," he muttered. "She'd never take a cent from me. Not unless she believed I'd changed." "And have you?" The question lingered. He didn't answer. That night, Alexander returned to his penthouse, but it felt like a museum now. Empty, cold, and too quiet. He walked past framed awards, news articles, luxury furniture, all symbols of the man he used to be. In the reflection of his glass walls, he barely recognized himself. He stopped by a drawer and opened it. Inside was an old photograph, Lydia on their wedding day, sunlight catching her hair. Her smile then was unguarded, real. He touched the photo gently. "I was supposed to protect you," he whispered, "not destroy you." He sat there for hours, the city lights blinking behind him like silent witnesses. When dawn came, he knew what he had to do. The next morning, he went to see Lydia again. She didn't look surprised when he walked in. "Just tired. I told you not to come back," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I can't pretend anymore. I saw where you live. I saw how hard you work. And the night knows to the moment the precedent fallaces, and the precedent too is fine." Her eyes flashed. "So what? You feel guilty now?" "I feel human again," he said softly. "Maybe for the first time in years." Lydia exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "You think you can just waltz in, say a few poetic lines, and fix everything?" "No," he said, "but maybe I can start." There was a pause. The café was empty, the girls were at school. Lydia leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "What do you want, Alex? Really?" He looked at her, the honesty raw in his voice. "I want to make it right," she laughed bitterly. "Right? You can't buy 10 years back." "I don't want to buy them," he said. "I just want to earn what's left. Can feel of retain." Lydia's defenses cracked slightly, though she tried to hide it. "You don't even know them, Alex. You don't know what it's like to raise 4 kids on your own." "Then teach me," he said. The words hung between them, quiet, vulnerable, real. Lydia turned away, busying herself with the coffee machine, but her hands trembled slightly. "You always said you were too busy for real life," she murmured. "And now you want to join mine?" "Yes," he said simply. "If you'll let me." She didn't respond. After a long moment, she poured him a cup of coffee black, the way he always used to take it, and set it on the counter without looking at him. "1 cup," she said. "No promises. As a foreign presence by the lifeist, and we're inclined." He smiled faintly, his heart aching with both gratitude and guilt. "That's more than I deserve." They sat in silence for a while. Lydia finally asked, "Why now?" He hesitated, then said, "Because I saw them, and I realized, every deal I ever made, every company I built, it means nothing if I don't know my own children." Lydia looked at him, her eyes softer now. "You always knew how to say the right thing, Alex. Words were never your problem. It was listening." "Con," he nodded. "Then I'll start by listening now." She sighed, clearly torn. Finally, she said quietly, "They think their father died before they were born." Alexander's breath caught. "What?" "It was easier that way," she said, "to explain why he wasn't there, why they had no one else." He felt the weight of her words like a physical blow. "Do they ever ask about me?" "Sometimes," she said. "Emma remembers pieces she was little, but she remembers your voice. The others, they just know stories." He closed his eyes, overwhelmed. "Then let me give them a new one." Lydia shook her head slowly. "You can't just appear and claim them. They've built a life. You need to earn your place in it." "I will," he promised. "No more shortcuts, no more power plays, just time, patience." Lydia studied him, searching for sincerity, and for the first time in years, she saw it. She whispered, "If you really mean that, then start by being consistent. Show up." He nodded. "Every day." That afternoon, Alexander stood outside the schoolyard, watching from afar as the girls ran out laughing. Lydia was there, waiting for them. For a long time, he just watched the most powerful man in the city, standing on a sidewalk, learning humility from the family he lost. As the girls ran into Lydia's arms, the smallest one turned for a second, looking in his direction. Their eyes met curious, unafraid. She smiled, and in that moment, Alexander knew. Redemption had just begun. That night, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about what Lydia had said. They think their father died. To the 1975, the words looped in his mind like an echo that refused to fade. Every success he'd ever had suddenly felt hollow. Every headline, every award, every handshake. How could the world think of him as powerful when his own children believed he was dead? Sleep wouldn't come. He wandered his penthouse until the city lights began to dim, then finally gave up and drove. He didn't know where he was going, just that he needed to see something real. When the sun rose, he found himself parked outside Lydia's café again. It was still closed. The morning air was cold, and dew glistened on the glass. A small sign on the door read, "Closed on Sundays. Family Day." Family. He sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying to remember what that word used to mean. At noon, he drove to Brooklyn Heights, where Lydia's small apartment was listed on the records Evelyn had found. He didn't plan to knock, but curiosity and guilt pulled him up the narrow stairway. Through the half-open window he heard laughter. Childish, bright, completely unguarded. He stood by the door, unseen, listening. "Mom, can we make pancakes again?" Rose's voice soft and eager. "Only if Emma doesn't burn them this time," Lydia replied, teasing. "I didn't burn them. The pan was too hot," Emma protested. Alexander smiled unconsciously. It was the kind of sound that once filled his home before ambition drowned everything. Then, as Lydia's voice drifted closer, he stepped back quickly, afraid she'd see him. His shoe brushed against something by the doorway, a small metal box, half hidden beneath a flower pot. He crouched and picked it up. It was old, rusted around the corners. Out of instinct, he opened it. Inside were folded letters. The first one began with his name. "Alex, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe I'm writing for myself. I want to tell you that I loved you truly, but love isn't enough when one person keeps choosing everything else first. You always said you were building something for us. I waited. Then I realized you were building it for yourself." He stopped reading. His hands were shaking. He took a breath and unfolded another letter. "The twins were born healthy. You'd love them. Emma's the older one by 2 minutes. She cries when her sister cries. It's like they share one heart. Sometimes I wish you could see them. Sometimes I wish I didn't." Another one dated 3 years later. "The girls started school today. I told them stories about you, about how their father was brave, smart, and kind. It's not true anymore, but I needed them to believe in something." By the time he finished the fourth letter, the paper was blurred from his tears. He wanted to stop, but there was one more tucked deep in the bottom. The handwriting was uneven, written with a child's shaky hand. "Dear Daddy, Mom said you're in heaven. Rose says you can see us from the clouds. If you can, please tell Mom she doesn't have to cry when she thinks we're sleeping. Love, Emma and Lila, Nora and Rose." Alexander pressed the letter to his chest, as if he could somehow absorb the lost years through the paper. He didn't notice Lydia standing in the doorway until she spoke. "I didn't think anyone would ever find those." "Don't." He turned, startled. She was standing there, holding a dish towel, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have touched them." She crossed her arms. "No, you shouldn't have." He held up the letter carefully. "They wrote this," she nodded, "when they were little. They used to send them to the sky, tie them to balloons. Said it was the only way to reach their father." His throat tightened. "Lydia, I didn't know." She looked away, her voice softening just slightly. "You weren't supposed to." There was a long silence. Only the faint sound of the city below filled the space between them. Finally, Lydia sighed. "You want to know why I left? It wasn't because I stopped loving you. It was because I stopped recognizing you." He swallowed hard. "I lost myself." "No," she said quietly. "You sold yourself. To your company. To your pride. You always thought love was a transaction. You give something, you get something back. But love doesn't work like that, Alex. You give. period. Her words cut deeper than any accusation. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said, voice trembling. "I just want a chance to make it right." She stared at him for a long time. "You can't undo 10 years, but you can show up now. That's the only currency that matters." "I will," he promised. "I swear it." That evening, Lydia took the girls to the park. Alexander stayed far back, hidden behind a tree. He watched them play, the golden light of sunset falling on their hair. They didn't know who he was, yet he couldn't look away. At one point, Rose tripped and scraped her knee. Lydia ran to her, soothing her with a kiss to the forehead. The gesture was so gentle, so instinctive, it made Alexander ache with longing. He imagined himself there picking Rose up, brushing off the dirt, making her laugh. It was a small dream, but it felt monumental. As he turned to leave, he noticed Nora sitting on a park bench, sketching quietly in her notebook. He glanced over her shoulder and saw the drawing 4 sisters, a mother and a man standing just behind them. The man's face was unfinished. "Who's that?" he asked softly, unable to stop himself. Nora jumped. Startled. She didn't recognize him, but she didn't seem afraid either. "That's my dad," she said. "Mom says he's gone, but sometimes I think he's still watching." Alexander felt a lump rise in his throat. "Maybe he is," she smiled shyly. "Do you think he's proud of us?" He nodded, voice barely a whisper. "More than you'll ever know." Then he stepped back, blending into the crowd before Lydia could see him. That night, back in his penthouse, Alexander placed the letters on his desk. One by one, he unfolded them again, reading every word. Then, for the first time in his life, he wrote one himself. "Dear Lydia, you were right. I built a world too big for love to fit in. I don't deserve a second chance, but if you ever decide to let me try, I'll spend the rest of my life proving I've changed. Love, Alex." He didn't send it. He folded it neatly and placed it in the same metal box with the others, because some letters weren't meant to be delivered. They were meant to remind you of what silence costs. The next week brought rain, thick, grey, endless rain that blurred the skyline and muffled the city's noise. For Alexander Reed, it felt like the sky was reflecting what he couldn't say aloud, the storm inside him that refused to pass. He sat in his car outside the café again, windshield wipers squeaking rhythmically. He wasn't there to confront Lydia this time. He was there because he couldn't stay away. Through the fogged-up glass, he saw her moving between tables, wiping counters, smiling at customers. She looked exhausted, but steady like a woman who'd weathered worse storms before. The girls were there too, doing homework at a corner table. Lila was doodling instead of writing, and Emma kept scolding her gently. Rose was humming a tune that made Nora laugh. They didn't look broken. They looked whole, and that, more than anything, broke him. He'd been the missing piece all this time, but the truth was they'd learned to live without him. For a man like Alexander, who built a life around being indispensable, that realization cut deeper than any insult. The door to the cafe opened suddenly, and Lydia's expression shifted. Alexander looked up. A tall man in his 40s walked in, holding a stack of documents. His shirt was damp from the rain, his tie loosened. Lydia's smile widened when she saw him. Alexander felt something twist in his chest. The man leaned over the counter and handed Lydia the papers. "New delivery contract. If you sign by Friday, I can still give you last month's rate." "Thank you, Paul," Lydia said warmly. "You're a lifesaver." "Paul." Alexander's jaw clenched. He didn't know why it bothered him, maybe because Lydia's tone was soft in a way she hadn't spoken to him in years. He tried to reason with himself. She was free to move on. He had no right to feel jealous. Still, the thought burned. Lydia laughed at something Paul said. Alexander couldn't hear the words, but her laughter hit him like a punch. He hadn't heard that sound in a decade at least, not because of him. He turned away, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm his breathing. But then, a small figure appeared by the cafe window. Rose. She pressed her palms against the glass, her breath fogging up the surface as she drew a little heart. When she saw Alexander watching, she smiled that same innocent, curious smile from before. Then she waved. Alexander's heart softened instantly. He waved back, almost instinctively. Lydia turned and froze when she saw him. Her face tightened, that familiar wall coming up again. She said something to Rose, who pouted and went back to the table. Lydia came to the door, stepped outside, and crossed the street. The rain soaked her hair within seconds. "You need to stop this," she said. "I wasn't following us?" Her tone was sharp. "You've been here every day, Alex. Do you have any idea what it feels like to look over your shoulder all the time?" He lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to see them." "You did see them," she said bitterly. "You see them, but you don't live with them. You weren't there when Rose had pneumonia. You weren't there when Emma cried because she didn't have a father for Parent Day. You can't just show up now and call it love." The words hit hard because they were true. He took a shaky breath. "I know, but I want to be there now." Lydia shook her head. "You say that like it's easy." "Let me try, Lydia," he pleaded. "Let me earn it. Please." Her eyes flickered with pain and something else. "Fear, maybe." "You don't know what you're asking for. Then tell me." She hesitated, rain dripping down her face. "It's not just about forgiveness, Alex. It's about trust. And I don't know if I can ever trust you again." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then start small. Let me help. Let me pick them up from school. Or fix that leak above the counter. Anything." Her expression softened just slightly, then hardened again. "If you really want to help, stay away until I figure out what's right for them." The rain fell harder. He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll wait." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Alex," he looked back. She hesitated. "For what it's worth, they like you. The girls. They keep calling you the kind man from the window." A small, sad smile tugged at his lips. "Then maybe that's who I'll be, for now." She nodded once and went back inside. That night, Alexander went home drenched, exhausted, and strangely lighter. For the first time, Lydia hadn't shut him out completely. That had to mean something. He poured himself a glass of water and noticed his reflection in the window again. But this time, he didn't see the ruthless CEO. He saw a man learning to wait. Then his phone rang. "Evelyn." "Sir, are you all right? You've missed 3 board meetings. The press is starting to ask questions." "I'm fine, Evelyn," he said. "Well, you might not be for long," she replied. "There's talk of an internal audit. The board is nervous about your absence. If you have to seven of the grief, and decided consist of the sofa minute of the whirl, coming light of the blive provided from the axtral of the sophalus. If you have device detected conseven to will ever of 5 soph, he was not into the fast of I've considered, and I of the blive of the type of the blive de blive of the mind, the noverment, the fast of a blive to the blive. So 7 typed of let them be nervous," he said quietly. "For once, I'm doing something that actually matters." Evelyn hesitated. "Does this have to do with her?" "Yes." There was silence, then a soft sigh. "Then I hope she's worth what you're about to lose." "She always was," he said, and hung up. A week later, Lydia came home late from work to find her front door slightly ajar. Panic shot through her chest. "Girls?" she called out, rushing inside. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Then she heard giggling from the kitchen. She ran in and froze. The girls were sitting at the table, eating homemade pasta, the kind she used to make with Alex years ago. And standing by the stove, wearing an apron and holding a pan, was Alexander. Lydia's jaw dropped. "What are you doing here?" He looked startled, then smiled sheepishly. "Relax. I'm not kidnapping anyone. Emma called me. Said you'd had a long day." Lydia turned to Emma, incredulous. "You what?" Emma shrugged innocently. "He was near the café, and we were hungry. He said he knew how to cook." Alexander raised a hand. "For the record, I do know how to cook. You used to say, my pasta was the only good thing I ever made." Lydia's expression softened despite herself. "That was before I learned to cook." They stood there for a moment, awkward, tense, but undeniably human. Rose piped up between mouthfuls. "Mom, he made dessert too." "Did he?" Lydia said, crossing her arms. "Chocolate pudding," Alexander said, grinning. "Still your favorite?" Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The girls were laughing now, oblivious to the weight of the moment, and for a fleeting second, Lydia saw something she hadn't seen in years, a family at the same table, full of warmth and laughter. It scared her, because part of her wanted to believe it could last. Later that night, after the girls were asleep, Lydia found Alexander on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly. He nodded. "I know, but it felt right. She sighed. You can't just walk in and play Father of the Year. I'm not playing, he said. I'm learning. The rain had stopped. The streets below shimmered with reflections of neon and water. Lydia turned to go back inside, but his voice stopped her. Lydia, about Paul. She froze. What about him? Is he someone? She smiled faintly. He's kind, reliable, the kind of man who stays. He nodded slowly. Then he's everything I wasn't. You said it, not me, she whispered. He exhaled, defeated. If he makes you happy, her eyes softened. He doesn't, not the way you did. But at least he never made me feel small. The silence stretched between them. Somewhere in that quiet, Alexander realized redemption wasn't going to come through grand gestures. It would come through endurance, through showing up, even when it hurt. And the storm that had been raging for 10 years was only beginning to clear. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, something began to shift. Lydia didn't tell Alexander to leave anymore, not immediately. At least, he still wasn't part of their lives, not officially, but he was around. He'd stop by the cafe early in the morning, pretending to be just another customer. He'd buy coffee, leave a big tip in the jar, and quietly fix things: a broken stool, a flickering light bulb, the leaky faucet Lydia kept forgetting to call a plumber for. Sometimes she'd roll her eyes, pretending to be annoyed. But deep down, she noticed. The girls noticed too. One afternoon, as Lydia was closing up, she found a small note taped to the counter. You once said love is shown in actions, not words. I'm learning. She read it twice, then tucked it into her apron pocket. But not everyone was happy about Alexander's return. One rainy Thursday, Lydia's manager, Mrs. Callahan, an older woman with a sharp tongue, pulled her aside. I don't like that man hanging around, she said, crossing her arms. He's trouble. The rich always are. Lydia sighed. He's not trouble. Not anymore. Mrs. Callahan raised a brow. And how would you know? You think people like him change? Lydia wanted to say yes. She wanted to believe it. But the truth was, she wasn't sure. Later that day, Paul came by with the new coffee shipment. He noticed Alexander's black car parked across the street and frowned. He's here again? Lydia kept her tone neutral. He's just checking in. Paul's voice dropped. You don't owe him anything, Lydia. Not after what he did. She looked up sharply. You don't even know him. Wezen en die is the partisan avond from Sebel. That's one my thing from 17th. 2000. I know the type, Paul said quietly. Men who think they can buy redemption. Lydia didn't answer, but her silence said enough. Paul left soon after, and the cafe fell quiet again except for the soft rain against the windows. Lydia stood there, staring at the reflection of her own face. Somewhere deep down, she wondered if Paul was right. Meanwhile, across the street, Alexander sat in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel. He'd seen Paul leave. He'd seen the way Lydia looked at him, not romantic, but safe. And for Alexander, that was somehow worse. He'd spent his whole life being admired, envied, feared, but never safe. Lydia had never been safe with him. He knew that now. When he returned to his office the next day, the world he'd built was cracking. The boardroom felt colder, the walls narrower. Evelyn pulled him aside after the meeting. Sir, the investors are asking questions. They want to know why you've been disappearing. Let them ask, he said flatly. She hesitated. There's talk of removing you as CEO. Alexander looked at her calm, tired, almost relieved. Then maybe it's time. You'd give it all up, she asked. He smiled faintly. If I'd given it up 10 years ago, maybe I wouldn't have lost everything that mattered. Evelyn stared at him for a moment, then said quietly, You really love her, don't you? I always did, he admitted. I just didn't know how to show it. That weekend, Lydia found herself facing an unexpected dilemma. Rose had been invited to perform at her school's music recital, and she wanted her friend Alex to come. Lydia froze. Honey, I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Rose pouted. He helped me practice the song. Please, Mummy. Emma looked up from her homework. He's nice, Mom. You like him, don't you? Lydia hesitated. 4 pairs of eyes stared at her, trusting, hopeful. She sighed. All right, but just this once. The girls squealed in excitement, hugging her before running off to pick out dresses. Lydia leaned back against the counter, rubbing her temples. She could already imagine the whispers from other parents, the questions. But maybe it was time. Maybe the truth needed to start somewhere. The night of the recital, the school auditorium was packed. The air buzzed with laughter and nervous energy. Lydia sat in the second row, smoothing her skirt, trying to ignore the stares. She dressed simply, but she still felt out of place among the perfectly groomed suburban parents. Then she heard murmurs ripple through the crowd. She turned and saw Alexander. He was standing at the back of the hall, wearing a plain grey coat instead of his usual tailored suit. He looked nervous, awkward, even holding a bouquet of daisies that didn't quite match the elegance of the room. Their eyes met. She almost smiled. Almost. When Rose stepped onto the stage, clutching her tiny violin, the whole room went silent. She looked around the crowd until she spotted him, her friend Alex. He waved gently. She grinned and began to play. It wasn't perfect, a few missed notes, a shaky bow, but it was pure, honest, and for Alexander, it was everything. As the applause erupted, Rose bowed, then ran straight to Lydia. "Mommy, did I do good?" "You were amazing," Lydia said, hugging her. Rose turned to Alexander, who was still standing near the back. "Did you like it?" "Have the flies of attended." He nodded, eyes glistening. "It was beautiful, sweetheart." Rose smiled proudly. "Can you come next time too?" Before Lydia could respond, Paul appeared beside her. "Lydia." She turned, startled. "Paul?" He looked between her and Alexander. "I didn't know he'd be here." "It's a public recital," she said carefully. Paul's expression darkened. "He's trying to win you back, isn't he?" "Paul, please." "No, you need to think about what's best for the girls," he said, voice rising. "He abandoned you once. He'll do it again." People were turning to look. Lydia's face flushed. Alexander stepped forward. "That's enough." Paul glared at him. "You think you can just stroll back into her life and pretend the past didn't happen?" Alexander's tone was calm but firm. "No. I think the past is exactly why I'm here." Paul scoffed. "You don't get to play hero now." "I'm not here to play anything," Alexander said quietly. "I'm here to stay." The tension in the room was thick. Lydia stepped between them. "Stop it, both of you." Paul exhaled sharply. "You'll regret this, Lydia," he muttered and walked away. Silence followed. Alexander turned to Lydia. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." She shook her head. "You didn't?" "Paul, he's just protective." He nodded. "He's not wrong to be." She looked up at him, weary but sincere. "Maybe not. But tonight, I saw something in your eyes I haven't seen in years." "What's that?" "Humility," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "It's a start." That night, as Lydia tucked the girls into bed, Rose whispered, "Mummy, can Alex come to my birthday next month?" Lydia hesitated, then kissed her forehead. "We'll see, sweetheart." But in her heart, she already knew the answer, because for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what would happen if Alexander stayed. She was afraid of what would happen if he didn't. A week passed after the recital, and for the first time in years, Lydia's world felt balanced. Not perfect, not easy, but balanced. The girls were happier, lighter. Rose hummed more often. Nora drew family pictures that now included a man with a face. Emma took on more responsibility, wanting to impress Mr. Alex, and even fiery little Lila seemed to giggle more. Lydia tried to tell herself this was temporary, that Alexander was just passing through their lives, learning how to care, maybe trying to close a chapter. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Every time he showed up with a quiet smile, fixing a leaky pipe or helping with homework, it felt like he was stitching invisible threads between them slowly, patiently, one gesture at a time. And despite all her defenses, Lydia found herself waiting for him too. One crisp Saturday morning, the girls insisted on visiting the farmer's market. Lydia reluctantly agreed. She didn't notice Alexander following them until Rose shouted his name from across the street. He froze like a kid caught skipping school, a paper bag of apples in his hand. "Alex!" Rose ran to him and hugged his legs. "You said you like apples, right? Mummy bought too many." Lydia sighed, hiding a small smile. "You're terrible at being invisible." He chuckled. "I wasn't trying to hide. I was just making sure you all got across safely." She raised an eyebrow. "You've been shadowing us?" "Observing," he corrected with mock seriousness. "There's a difference, as is forend." "The tame's naughty." Lydia shook her head, but her lips curved slightly. "You're impossible." "Maybe," he said, smiling, "but I'm learning to be human again." She didn't respond, but he noticed the faintest blush as she turned away to corral the girls. They spent the morning strolling between stalls. For the first time in over a decade, Alexander walked beside them carrying grocery bags, handing out napkins, laughing when Rose insisted on feeding every stray cat in sight. When Lila spilled orange juice on his sleeve, he didn't flinch or scold her. He just laughed and said, "Guess I deserved that for wearing white." Lydia saw it all, and for the first time, she felt the weight of 10 years begin to loosen. That afternoon, Lydia and Alexander sat on a park bench while the girls played nearby. The air smelled of roasted peanuts and fresh grass. "Do they know yet?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Not yet. I'm not sure how." He nodded. "They'll find out eventually. Kids always do." "Then maybe I should tell them," she said softly. "Before the world does." Alexander hesitated. "Are you sure?" Lydia looked at him. "You've been in their lives for months now, Alex. They already love you. They deserve to know the truth." He swallowed hard. "And if they hate me for it, as Villy enjoys to have bred it?" The resider ducked in the long. "They won't," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "They'll be confused, maybe angry, but they'll understand, because you're here now." But before she could act on that decision, the past came knocking, literally. 3 days later, a black car pulled up in front of the café. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, holding a folder. His face was familiar, too familiar. "Mr. Reed," Lydia said, recognizing him. "You still work for the company?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied stiffly. "I represent the board of Reed Holdings." Lydia's stomach dropped. "Is Alex okay?" she asked. The man nodded. "He's stepping down as CEO. The media will likely contact you soon." Balustrasted long. "What?" Lydia whispered. "Why?" The man hesitated, glancing around. "There's an internal investigation. They believe his recent financial withdrawals are personal and connected to you." Lydia's face went pale. "That's ridiculous. He hasn't given me anything." The man sighed. "Ma'am, I believe you. But the optics aren't good. The press loves a redemption scandal." Before she could respond, he handed her a document. "This is a notice of inquiry. You might be contacted for questioning." "So?" Lydia stood frozen as the man walked away. That evening, she called Alexander, her hands shaking. "You're being investigated." He exhaled heavily. "It's political. The board's using my absence as an excuse to push me out. They think you gave me money," she said. "I don't care what they think," he replied. "I care about you." "Alex," she said, her voice trembling, "this could destroy your career." He was silent for a moment. Then, "Lydia, I'm okay with that." She blinked, stunned. "What?" "I've spent 10 years protecting a company that never loved me back. If losing it means protecting you, protecting them, then let it burn." There was such calm in his voice that it frightened her more than anger ever could. "Don't you see?" she whispered. "You can't lose everything again." "I already lost everything once," he said softly. "This time, I'm choosing what to keep." The next morning, the tabloids exploded. Billionaire CEO steps down amid scandal. Mystery woman and 4 children linked to Reed family drama. Photos of Lydia and the girls outside the cafe were plastered everywhere. Some called her the mistress, others the runaway wife. Reporters camped outside her building. The cafe's sales plummeted. Customers whispered. Parents pulled their children away from the girls at school. Emma came home crying one afternoon. "Mommy kids said Daddy's a criminal." Lydia's chest tightened. "He's not, sweetheart. They just don't understand." "But is he really my daddy?" Rose asked, her voice small. Lydia froze. The question she'd been dreading was finally here. She knelt down, tears welling up. "Yes, baby. He's your father." The room went silent. Emma looked at her mother, her voice trembling. "Then why did he leave us?" Lydia couldn't breathe. Because adults make mistakes, big ones. But he's trying to fix them now." Rose frowned. "Can he stay forever?" Lydia's voice cracked. "I hope so, sweetheart. I really do." That night, Alexander showed up at her door. His face was tired, his eyes red. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I needed to see you," he said. "Are the girls okay?" She nodded weakly. "They're scared, confused, but they know now." He swallowed hard. "What did they say?" "They asked if you could stay," she whispered. He closed his eyes, tears slipping down. Then I will. Lydia looked at him, this man who had once been made of steel, now standing in her hallway, undone by the truth. I don't care what the papers say, she said. I just don't want to lose you again. He stepped closer, his voice breaking. You won't. Not this time. Outside, flashbulbs flickered as reporters shouted his name. But inside that small apartment, for the first time, Alexander Reed didn't flinch. Because the truth, the one he'd run from for 10 years, had finally come home. And he was ready to face it. By the time dawn broke, the story had gone global. Every news network, every business outlet, every gossip site had one name plastered across their headlines: Alexander Reed. Photos of Lydia's café, her daughters, and Alexander's visits were everywhere. Comment sections burned with judgment, some painting him as a monster, others romanticizing him as the billionaire who found his lost family. Lydia's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, old acquaintances, even distant relatives she hadn't heard from in years. She silenced it all. The girls stayed home from school that day. Lydia drew the curtains, made pancakes, and tried to make it feel like any other morning. But it wasn't. Every sound outside a car door, a knock, a shout, made her flinch. "Mummy," Nora said quietly, peeking out through the blinds. "There are people outside again." Lydia knelt beside her, pulling the curtains shut. "I know, sweetheart. They'll get tired soon." But even she didn't believe it. At the same time, Alexander was walking into the lion's den. He stood outside the Reed Holdings headquarters, facing a wall of cameras and flashing lights. Dozens of reporters shouted his name, hurling questions that cut through the cold morning air. "Mr. Reed, did you use company funds to support your ex-wife? Are those 4 girls really your children? Do you plan to resign permanently? Connext in flax. The la's not one bila. Connext in bereda." Alexander didn't respond. He walked straight through the noise, head high, heart steady, not as the CEO he once was, but as a man finally willing to take the blows he'd earned. Inside, the boardroom was packed. The directors sat in rigid silence, the air thick with tension. His lawyer began to speak, but Alexander raised a hand. "Don't. I'll handle this myself." He stood at the head of the table, the same place he'd commanded for years. But this time, his voice wasn't sharp with power. It was quiet, measured, human. "You all think I've lost control," he began. "You're right. I lost it 10 years ago when I let ambition replace humanity." Murmurs rippled through the room. "I didn't misuse company funds," he continued. "Every dollar I withdrew was from my personal account. But yes, I gave it away. To people who needed it more than I did. To my family." "Your former family," one board member interjected coldly. Alexander met his gaze. "No, my real family. The one I abandoned for this room." A heavy silence followed. "I understand the optics," he said. "So I'm resigning, effective immediately." Gasps broke out. "You can't just walk away from Reed Holdings," another member snapped. Alexander gave a faint, tired smile. "Reed Holdings survived before me. It'll survive after me. But if I keep pretending this is who I am, I won't. And has been calendar being as the man of Kades the 10 seals, for Marty's Hauser, and with that, he signed the papers on the table, slid them forward, and left no bodyguards, no entourage, no applause, just freedom. Later that day, Lydia was wiping down the cafe counter when the doorbell chimed. She didn't look up at first. She assumed it was another customer trying to sneak a photo. "Sorry, we're—" She froze. "Alex." He stood there, drenched from the rain, his coat unbuttoned, eyes tired but calm. "It's done," he said simply. "What do you mean?" "I resigned." She blinked. "You... what?" He smiled faintly. "I'm not CEO anymore." Lydia's hands trembled. "You gave up everything." "I didn't give it up," he said softly. "I traded it for something real. Have allowed to the like in a maro mori too. Try the like and be lound. 2,000 de like. Some things that'd show." She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "You're crazy." "Maybe," he said, stepping closer. "But for the first time I'm sane about what matters." He reached into his pocket and placed something on the counter, a small silver locket. She recognized it instantly. It was the one she'd left behind the night she walked out 10 years ago. "I kept it," he said quietly. "Every day. I thought it would remind me of what I lost, but it didn't. It reminded me of what I still needed to become. Lydia opened it. Inside was a tiny photo, their wedding picture. The edges were worn, but the faces still smiled. She looked up at him, her voice shaking. "What are you going to do now?" He smiled faintly. "Start over." The next morning, Alexander faced a different kind of press, the ones who wanted answers. Not blood. He agreed to one interview. One only. Live. Unfiltered. When the red light went on, the reporter asked, "Mr. Reed, the world wants to know why walk away from billions." He didn't hesitate. "Because I learned that you can't buy peace, and you can't rebuild trust with money." "What do you say to those who call this a PR stunt?" Alexander looked straight into the camera. "This isn't about my image. It's about my children, 4 little girls who didn't even know their father existed. If you want a story, that's the one that matters." The reporter leaned forward. "Are you saying you're choosing family over legacy?" He smiled, small but real. "No, I'm choosing family as my legacy." The clip went viral overnight, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. For the first time, people didn't see the cold billionaire. They saw a father trying to heal what his power had destroyed. Lydia watched the interview from home, her daughters huddled around her. When Alexander said those words, "I'm choosing family as my legacy," Emma turned to her and whispered, "Mom, can he come home now?" Lydia couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. That evening, Alexander came to their apartment again. There were no reporters this time. No headlines, just rain on the windows and 4 little girls running into his arms. "Daddy!" Rose squealed, the word new on her tongue but already perfect. He froze for half a second, then knelt down, arms open, eyes full of tears. "Yeah, baby. Daddy's here." Lydia stood by the doorway, watching the man she once loved now holding the life they created, fragile but real. He looked up at her, voice trembling. "I told you I'd earn it." She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "You did." And for the first time in 10 years, Alexander Reed, the man who once ruled a city, found himself exactly where he was meant to be. Not on a stage, not in a boardroom, but home. The weeks that followed were quiet, almost eerily so. After the storm of headlines and cameras, life began to slow down. The reporters faded, the gossip cooled, and for the first time in a decade, the world wasn't watching Alexander Reed. He was just Alex now, the man who walked the girls to school in the morning, the one who packed lunches too big and burned toast half the time. It was awkward at first. The girls were polite but uncertain, especially Emma, who carried the memory of absence more sharply than the others. Sometimes she'd look at him and ask the kind of questions only a child could deliver with such brutal honesty. "Why didn't you love Mommy enough to stay?" He was the Strections. "Were we not important before?" Each question landed like a stone. But Alexander never deflected. He never hid behind excuses or business words. He answered every one with the same quiet honesty that had become his redemption. "I didn't know how to love the right way back then," he said one evening, sitting on the couch as the girls colored nearby. "But I'm learning. Every day I get to be here with you, that's my lesson." Lydia overheard from the kitchen. She didn't say a word, but her heart softened a little more. The girls began to let him in slowly, beautifully. Rose started climbing into his lap during story time. Nora insisted he help her with art projects. Lila wanted him to come to soccer practice. And Emma started sitting beside him during dinner. Not saying much, but staying. That was enough. Alexander had traded boardrooms for bedtime stories, conference calls for school recitals, and corporate forecasts for the unpredictable weather of family life. He'd never been busier or happier, but even in this newfound peace, there was something unfinished between him and Lydia. They coexisted, tender but cautious, shared smiles over dinner, quiet laughter in the mornings, but they both knew forgiveness wasn't a switch. It was a process, 1,000 small decisions to trust again. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Lydia found Alexander on the balcony, staring out at the skyline. The same skyline where their lives had fallen apart, now quietly watching their reunion. "You used to love that view," she said softly. He nodded. "I thought it meant success. Now it just reminds me of how high I built the walls around us." Lydia leaned against the railing beside him. "You've changed, Alex." He smiled faintly. "I had to. The man I was wouldn't have deserved a second chance." She looked at him, studying the lines on his face, the wear, the humility that hadn't been there before. "Maybe you always had this in you," she said. "You just forgot." He turned to her. "Do you forgive me?" Lydia didn't answer right away. She looked down, watching the city lights flicker below them. "Forgiveness isn't a single moment," she said quietly. "It's every day I choose not to hold the past against you. Some days, I can do it easily. Other days, I understand," he said. She met his eyes. "But I'm trying." He exhaled, a soft sound that carried years of tension. "That's more than I could ever ask." They stood there for a long time, not touching, but no longer apart. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Lydia received a letter embossed with the Reed Holdings logo. She froze when she saw it. "What is it?" Alexander asked when she handed it to him. "It's from your board," she said. He tore it open and scanned the contents. His brows furrowed, then softened into disbelief. "They're offering me a position on the foundation board," he said slowly. "Not as CEO, as a director for community outreach." Lydia blinked. "They want you back?" He nodded. "They say the public response to my interview changed the company's image. They want me to lead their charity division." She smiled faintly. "You're being rewarded for telling the truth." He shook his head, smiling back. "No. I'm being given a chance to use what I have for something real this time." A week later, he took the job not because he wanted power again, but because he wanted purpose. He brought the girls with him to the first charity event. It wasn't glamorous. It was a food drive, loud, messy, full of children running around. But he looked completely at home. Reporters snapped photos of him carrying boxes, laughing with volunteers, and pouring soup beside Lydia and the girls. The headlines this time were different. "From CEO to father, Alexander Reed's redemption journey inspires thousands. Reed Foundation expands programs for families in need." But Alexander didn't care about the articles anymore. What mattered was the look on Lydia's face when she saw him helping a little boy tie his shoe patient. Gentle, kind. Later that night, she found him loading leftover boxes into a truck. His shirt was stained, his hair a mess. "Who would have thought," she said, teasing lightly. "Alexander Reed doing manual labor." He chuckled. "Don't tell the old board. They might revoke my Billionaire card." She smiled, watching him for a moment. "You know," she said softly, "for a man who used to own half the city, you look happiest covered in dust." He grinned. "It's the only kind of dirt that feels clean." Lydia laughed quietly. It was the first time she'd truly laughed like that around him since before everything fell apart. That night, after putting the girls to bed, Lydia found him again sitting on the couch, flipping through old photos he'd managed to recover from a forgotten hard drive. There they were, their wedding, their first apartment, the day Emma was born. She sat beside him, and for a moment they just looked. He finally whispered, "I used to think forgiveness was something you earned once, but it's not. It's something you keep earning." She nodded. "And love?" He smiled gently. "Love is something you never stop proving." Lydia reached for his hand. It was hesitant, but real. "Then maybe it's time we both start proving it again." He turned to her, voice barely a whisper. "Does that mean what I think it means?" She smiled softly. "It means I'm ready to stop running." He exhaled shakily, tears welling in his eyes. "Then so am I." And for the first time in 10 years, forgiveness wasn't an idea, it was alive, breathing between them. The city outside moved on, unaware that somewhere in a small apartment above a quiet café, two people were learning to love again. Spring came quietly that year. The rain softened, the air turned warm, and for the first time since their world had fallen apart, the Reeds, yes, the Reeds began to live like a family again. It wasn't a grand reunion. There were no speeches, no formal declarations. It began with little things, a breakfast where laughter filled the room, a night when everyone fell asleep watching a movie on the couch, a morning when Alexander packed school lunches with hearts drawn on napkins. It was messy, imperfect, and beautiful. The girls adjusted faster than anyone expected. They still called him Alex sometimes, but Dad slipped out more often now, natural, unforced. Every morning, he drove them to school in a modest family car, not one of his old luxury sedans. He'd roll down the windows, let the wind blow through their hair, and play their favorite songs. Rose always sang off-key, and he'd join her just to make Lydia laugh. One day, Nora asked, "Dad, were you scared when you stopped being rich?" He smiled through the rearview mirror. "A little." But I was more scared of never hearing you call me Dad. The girls giggled. Lydia, sitting beside him, turned her head toward the window, smiling quietly. The café became their center of gravity, a small, bustling place that carried the heartbeat of their new life. Lydia managed the counter, the girls helped on weekends, and Alexander worked behind the scenes, expanding it just enough to thrive without losing its warmth. He installed new lights, fixed the espresso machine, and handled the taxes, but he refused to change the name. It stayed Harper's Café. He every waiting doing the hast. When Lydia asked him why, he said, "Because that name is the reason I found my way back, and I want to remember it every day." One evening, after closing time, Lydia found a small envelope on the counter. Inside was a deed the café transferred entirely in her name. She turned to him, shocked. "Alex, what is this?" He smiled softly. "My final business transaction." She frowned. "You can't just give this to me." "I'm not giving it," he said. "I'm returning it. It's yours. It always was." Lydia stared at him, emotion rising in her throat. "You really did change." He shrugged gently. "You were the reason I did." She stepped closer, touched his face and whispered, "Then maybe we both did. This is a bride for vengeance the deet in the small." Twirled of the deet, he closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, and for a long moment there was nothing but silence, the quiet kind that heals. Months passed, and life began to look ordinary again in the best possible way. There were school runs, late-night homework, small arguments about screen time, and family dinners that sometimes ended in food fights. Alexander learned to make pancakes. Lydia learned to trust again. Every scar between them slowly became a story they no longer had to hide. And every story became a promise of something new. One Sunday morning, the family took a drive to the countryside, to the old estate, where Alexander had grown up, long abandoned after his parents' passing. It had been 10 years since he'd stepped foot there. The place was overgrown with ivy and silence. The girls ran ahead through the tall grass, laughing as they explored. Lydia stood beside Alexander at the gate, watching them. "This was your world," she said quietly. He nodded. "It used to be. And now?" He smiled faintly. "Now, it's just land. The real world's with them." Lydia looked at him, eyes full of warmth. "Maybe we could build something new here, together." He turned to her, surprised. "You'd want that?" She nodded. "Not a mansion, not the empire you lost, just a home, something that belongs to all of us." Alexander's throat tightened. A home. The word felt sacred. He reached for her hand, not out of desperation this time, but peace. Then, let's build it. The months that followed became a slow, beautiful transformation. The old estate came alive again, not with luxury, but with laughter. The girls helped paint the walls, Lydia chose wildflowers for the garden, and Alexander built a small swing by the oak tree, where he used to play as a boy. They planted an apple tree together, one for each daughter. Emma asked, "What about you and Mommy? Don't you get one?" Alexander smiled. "Ours already grew. It just took a while to find sunlight." The day they moved in, there was no ceremony, no cameras, no headlines, just family. Lydia carried the last box into the house and found Alexander sitting on the porch steps, looking at the horizon. The girls were chasing each other across the yard, their laughter echoing against the hills. "You look like a man who finally found peace," she said, sitting beside him. He chuckled softly. "I think I did." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "So what now, Mr. Reed?" He smiled. "Now? I wake up, make breakfast, and try to be a better man than I was yesterday." She smiled back. "That's all I ever wanted." As the sun set, Rose ran to them, holding something in her hand, a small drawing. It showed a house surrounded by flowers, 5 stick figures holding hands under a golden sky. "Look," Rose said proudly. "It's us." Lydia smiled. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Rose grinned. "I wrote our names too. Mommy, Daddy, Emma, Lila, Nora, and me." Alexander took the drawing, his vision blurring. "You forgot one thing," he said gently. Rose tilted her head. "What?" He pointed to the little sun in the corner. "You forgot to sign your art." Rose giggled, grabbed the paper, and scrawled her name beside the sun. "Rose Reed." Lydia's eyes filled with tears. Alexander looked at her, his voice breaking. "I guess that's the first time she's used it." Lydia nodded, smiling through her tears. and the first time it truly meant something. As the every sighs of the completed, "My lating Falland," he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close as the evening light turned golden. For a long time, neither spoke. There was no need. The air itself carried what words couldn't say: forgiveness, belonging, and love that had been tested, shattered, and rebuilt stronger than before. Years from now, people would still remember the name Alexander Reed, but not as the billionaire who lost everything. They'd remember the man who found what mattered most, not in fortune, but in family. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come with applause. It comes in the laughter of 4 little girls, and in the quiet voice of the woman who finally says, "Welcome home."